Please welcome James Mangold. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you.
I think that, and I know a lot of people share this feeling, you are such an interesting and rare kind of filmmaker, especially in today's world. It's almost like you're out of the golden age now, and I'll explain why I'm saying this.
I don't mind. Keep going.
Yeah. So I was interviewing not long ago one of your Complete Unknown stars, Oscar nominee Edward Norton, and we were talking about you and your filmography, and the closest comp that either of us could come up with is Howard Hawks, who was this great filmmaker of the golden age, who was always, you could always count on him. He was making solid, really good films, but he wasn't showy, and so he didn't get a lot of attention. He was not showing off as a filmmaker, and he worked across just about every genre that existed. And that brings me to mentioning some of your films. There have been, these are the films just that you've directed. Forget about all the others that you've produced or in other ways been involved with. Directed, dramas, heavy Girl Interrupted, biopics, musical biopics like Walk the Line, westerns, 3:10 to Yuma, crime thrillers, Copland, action movies, Ford v. Ferrari. And that's a little reductive, but you get what I'm saying. Mystery horror, Identity, franchise films, The Wolverine, Logan, Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. How did you become a guy who can work in such varied formats of size and genre and scale? Like, was that always the ambition, or is that just sort of how it worked out?
I mean, it was always what I loved, meaning the wonderful filmmakers who preceded me out here, most of us grew up on movies, both we saw at art house theaters and in mainstream theaters, and we consumed all of them and worshiped all of them. And so I certainly, I hardly knew I was going to become, I would succeed at becoming a film director. So I certainly didn't have the temerity to know which kind I was going to become at an early stage, but I loved all these worlds. The only thing, and this is, it almost sounds evasive, but maybe it isn't, is it's true for me, is that when we think and talk and study film, when we debate film with each other, we put it in boxes. It makes it easier. It makes how we do everything easier. But as from my own personal experience making all these varied movies, the biggest thing I think as you're listing them is that they're not so different, and that the experience making them is not so different. I can be making a $250 million movie or a $25 million movie, and I still have to walk into a space with actors and a camera and make the scene work. And most of the rest of that money is going to visual effects or something else, but the core tasks at hand are identical on every film for me. The key, and the other thing that comes to mind is just that the boxes we're using make no sense, really. They're just useful for dialogue, but meaning you call Ford v. Ferrari an action picture. Well, it could be called a biopic. It's a true story. Right. But you don't call it a biopic because I guess it doesn't have someone singing in it, which I guess is the new requirement of a biopic. But Girl Interrupted could be called a biopic, but it's called a drama. So automatically these labels start to dissolve. And you could call Logan a superhero movie, but what the fuck is a superhero movie anyway? Meaning, is that a genre? It means like there's kind of fascistic suits and people put on latex and they live in a cave and their identity is secret and there's this genre called superhero movie? Or is it actually the myths we've been telling since the Greeks, only we've now called it superhero instead of calling it Hercules, and we've renamed it in some way, but it's not a genre at all, but just actually a franchise run by two particular studios that own the two largest comic book companies. So are these genre like noir and Western? Like, to me, if you said, what's Logan? I'd say it's a Western. So that's what I was thinking about when I made it. Certainly not, Kmart action figures. And so that's all. What's most interesting to me is the fact that we create these barriers, which came out of film analysis, but they don't necessarily imply to what it is to make a movie, at least for me, which is to the investigation of the themes of the thing, and genre as more of a tool of where you're trying to misapply genre, like making a film about the Wolverine in the style of a Western becomes interesting to me. Where things become interesting is where you're taking something from another place and moving it into a place that seems philosophically potentially wrong, and that's really interesting.
Oh, that's a great answer. So, A Complete Unknown to, we could go back to these boxes and comparisons and say, is it a relative of another great movie you made 20 years ago, Walk the Line? There is the overlapping idea of, a study of a great musician. We actually have Johnny Cash showing up in Complete Unknown as well. But I guess what for you inspired you enough when you heard about, when you basically, what set you off on writing this on spec essentially originally? Can you explain how, because, that's not, I can't imagine you're doing a ton of that at this point.
No, but when you get excited about something, you just go after it. And I mean, in a lot of ways, I prefer to write that way anyway, because I kind of do even when they pay me, which is that I just kind of go, leave me alone for a long time. And I'm really interested in the efforts, Brady was talking about this, the efforts people make, the efforts people go to make things, and these things, Susanna Kaysen of Girl Interrupted became a writer. Ford Ferrari it's titled like it's a competition between car companies, but it's really a kind of love story between two men who love to make cars and have a hard time doing it, and have a passion and a brilliance for it. Certainly that applies to Walk the Line, and I think it applies to this movie. There's really interesting stuff to me. I'm the son of two artists, two painters. The creative world is the world I've lived in all my life. And there's a million ways. Of course, I like Bob Dylan's music. It's a pleasure to enter the world of the folk scene of the 60s. I miss that New York. I miss that America. I miss the vibe and look of the world and the sounds of it and the smells of it. But what attracted me so profoundly was the idea that there was a concentrated story between Dylan's arrival in New York as a kind of, man with no name or man with a new name, and only 5 years later selling as many records as the Beatles and having this kind of breakaway, which brings us back to what you were asking me about, breaking out of the box of the way people had already confined him as a kind of genre act that needed to be doing a certain kind of thing and stay in that lane. And that was all really interesting to me. And then you add all the specificity and juice of Joan Baez and Bob Dylan and Pete Seeger, who I grew up loving. And I couldn't resist it. I had no idea if there was a commercial application for the project. I had no idea if anyone would want to see it. But I did love the idea of just living in that world for a while.
In terms of shaping this story,
Thank you.
You've had a lot of interesting mentors over the course of your time as a film student all the way through. One of them is somebody who twice won the award that you're now nominated for the first time, Best Director Oscar. That was Milos Forman, won for One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, but also for Amadeus, which is a movie that, interestingly, and you've been very open about this, was an influence on this. Can you talk about how that applies to A Complete Unknown and this idea of a genius at work?
Well, how would you put this? There's a kind of standard, something I did in Walk the Line, something many movies do. There's a kind of standard, almost Freudian dramatic structure, right? Which establishes a protagonist with a problem, maybe a trauma, a childhood trauma, some kind of damage they're carrying. And then somewhere in the story, presumably late in the second act, this thing is disabling them in their way, and they have to come to terms with it, speak its name. It could be Matt Damon in Robin Williams' therapy office. It could be Tim Hutton in Judd Hirsch's therapy office. It could be Johnny Cash talking to June Carter and saying, my father didn't love me. But the classic, and I'm reducing it to its base, but not to mock it, just to say that's one way of doing things, and it's been done many times. I didn't feel like I could do that with Dylan. I didn't feel like it applied. I couldn't identify a kind of trauma he was carrying that he was going to have to escape from. Although in the making of the movie, I kind of did find one. So what I went looking for was a way, when I made Girl Interrupted, for those who know the movie, it was The Wizard of Oz. Well, how do I tell this story? A young woman who's depressed, who lands in a circumscribed universe from which she can't escape. She meets all these incredible people who are fractalizations of her own personality, and ultimately discovered she could have gotten out anytime she wanted. Oh, fuck, it's The Wizard of Oz. And that really helped me. And in this case, I went, oh shit, it's Amadeus. And it may be a movie about Bob Dylan, but I need to really get underneath all these supporting players, because what's most interesting about genius isn't the question of where it comes from, which I don't think is answerable in any concrete way, but how we all react to it. I mean, I wasn't going to turn someone into a pure Salieri and wish death upon Bob, but although I'm sure there were people who did, but the reality is I did want to explore that relationship of the person who doesn't have that volcano, who may be really creative, incredibly sharp, but just that's not there for them. Also, the people who want to commodify it or make money from it, the people who hate it, the people who fall in love with talent just to get closer to it, that there was a kind of whole orbit. And when I get to where I thought I could almost identify what his burden was that I hadn't thought of when I started, which came out of meeting with him a bit, but also this process of exploration, it was, it's awesome to be talented, but it's also lonely. Because it means that you're separated from everyone. Because while everyone is looking at you like you're amazing, or envying you, or wanting to own you, or wanting to commodify you, what they're not doing is actually being truly intimate with you. What they're doing is seeing you as a kind of volcano or creative machine, and you're alone as much as they feel alone with you. And it suddenly made me kind of understand another kind of dynamic, which is when someone's plugged into something, which in my own modest way, I think a lot of us who make things can identify with. When you're really plugged in or wired into an idea, something gives on your personal life. It's not even. You can't clock out of the creative life and clock into the normal life and clock out again. There is some kind of trade-off. And if you're in as deep as Bob was, where he even admitted on 60 Minutes a decade ago, like, I don't know where it came from, that you're channeling something. And maybe some of that is what we called his arrogance or ambiguity or evasiveness, is actually the fact that he was living in two places at the same time, one that we can't fathom and one that was present. And that can look like many things, but maybe that became another thing that Timothy and I really explored, behind the scenes.
Well, last night we got to hear from one of your Oscar-nominated stars of this movie, Monica Barbaro. Later this week, we'll be hearing from another here at Santa Barbara, Timothy Chalamet.
That's tomorrow, isn't it?
Tomorrow.
I hope so, because I'm here for it.
Yes. There's also, of course, Edward Norton. So 3 actors from this great ensemble are are individually recognized. You writing, directing, and producing. It's been cool to see just how people have caught on with this movie.
It's lovely. It's been really rewarding to see people embrace the movie, and that's really what it's all about. That's what you toil for.
Awesome.
So that's really great.
Well, thank you, Jim.
Thank you. Thank you.
We are now going to do something kind of cool, which is this part, is not that exciting. We're going to play a ad, but while that ad is playing, that's
true theater experience.
That's gonna buy us a few minutes to set up the stage so that we can bring out all 5 of tonight's honorees for a closing group chat. But thank you, James Mangold.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.